All right, so Xiaomi's MiMo V2.5 Pro just showed up, and it's genuinely threatening Claude Opus 5's spot at the top. We're talking a model that hits 78.9% on SWE bench while burning 40 to 60% fewer tokens than Anthropic's previous gen. Both of these models dropped recently, and the pricing gap between them is honestly kind of wild right now. So I ran them across 4 real tests: reasoning, pricing, context, and latency. Verified sources only, 16 of them. No vendor slides, no cherry-picked demos. And if you're running high volume API calls right now, the model you're paying for might be costing you 8 times more per output token than it needs to. And the answer to that is not what I expected. So this one's for developers, team leads, or anyone calling a frontier model at any real volume. The cost gap between these two compounds every single month as a real dollar amount, and picking the wrong one means you're either overpaying by a lot or leaving serious capability on the table. Test 1 is multi-step reasoning and coding. What goes wrong without a strong model here is pretty concrete. You send it a GitHub issue, it touches 6 files, misses a dependency on step 4, and now your pipeline is broken and you're debugging at midnight. A model's score on this translates directly into whether you're shipping or not shipping. What I found here is a split picture. MiMo V2.5 Pro has a community reported 78.9% on SWE bench, which is solid. But Claude Opus 5 is the frontier bench leader and scored 3 times the next best model on RKGI 3. These are different benchmarks, not the same test, so you can't just line up the numbers directly. Now, I want to be honest before we call anything. MiMo's GPQA diamond score is all over the place. 54% in the blog, 87% from artificial analysis. That's a massive conflict, and it's not resolved yet. And MiMo ranked 27th out of 40 on Valves.ai's independent suite. So the real-world gap between these two is probably smaller than the frontier benchmark headlines suggest. Claude Opus 5 takes test 1. Honestly, I was expecting MiMo to hold its own across the board, given that SWE bench number, but the ART AGI 3 result and the frontier bench lead are hard to argue with. Those are frontier level numbers, so Claude Opus 5 goes up 1-0, and MiMo is still at 0. S2 is API pricing per million tokens, and this one hits your finance team, not your engineering team. You build a product on a flagship model, usage scales up, and suddenly your API bill is eating your margin. At $25 per million output tokens, that number compounds really, really fast once you're past a few million calls a month. So I looked at the official published rates, and this one is not close. MiMo V2.5 Pro runs $1 per million input tokens and $3 per million output. Claude Opus 5 is $5 input and $25 output. That's 5 times more expensive on input and over 8 times more on output at official rates. And even at the best available provider rates, MiMo's still roughly 10 times cheaper. Now, Claude Opus 5 has a batch API at $2.50 input and $12.50 output per million, which narrows the gap if you can use it. It also has prompt caching down to a 512 token minimum threshold, which saves real money on repeated prompts. So if you're optimizing hard on the Anthropic side, the effective gap is smaller than the headline rates make it look. MiMo V2.5 Pro takes test 2, and it's not even a contest at official rates. What surprised me is that even factoring in MiMo's token efficiency claim, 40 to 60% fewer tokens at comparable quality, the real cost gap could be even wider than the per token numbers show. So we're tied up now, 1 win each. Test 3 is context window and retrieval architecture. What goes wrong here is subtle but painful. You feed the model a massive code base or a long document, it starts strong, and then somewhere deep in the session, it loses the thread on something it already saw. You get a confident wrong answer, and you don't catch it until it's already in production. What surprised me here is that both models match at exactly 1 million tokens. So on raw window size, it's a dead tie. Where they differ is how they handle that context. MiMo uses a hybrid attention MOE architecture trained specifically for 1,000 plus tool call sessions, while Claude Opus 5 uses automatic summarization near the limit, which is a different bet on the same problem. Honestly, neither model has published independent retrieval fidelity results at depths, so we can't actually say which one holds the thread better in practice. Claude Opus 5 does have a concrete edge on prompt caching, with a 512 token minimum threshold that's lower than Opus 4.8's 1022. MiMo has no published caching spec at all, so that's a real gap in the data. This one's a tie, and I was honestly expecting one of them to pull ahead on architecture, but the data just doesn't support calling a winner without independent retrieval fidelity numbers. So it splits, and the scoreboard stays at 1 win each, with 1 test tied now. Test 4 is response latency under load. Slow time to first token in a chat product feels broken to your users, and if you're running an agentic loop with 50 steps, a model that's half as fast doubles your wall clock time and your infrastructure cost at the same time. So I looked at what artificial analysis independently measured, and MiMo V2.5 Pro came in at 62.5 tokens per second with a 2.21 second time to first token. Those are real, independently verified numbers. What surprised me is that Claude Opus 5 has 0 published throughput or TTFT figures from any independent source, so there's literally nothing to compare against. Now, Claude Opus 5 does have a fast mode that runs at 2.5 times default speed, which is a real option if you need it. But that node costs $10 per million input and $50 per million output, which is more than MiMo's standard rate by a wide margin. And MiMo's Balance.ai figure of 839 seconds per test is a 128,000 max output config. So don't read that as a typical latency number. Another tie, and honestly that's the only fair call here, you can hand the win to either side when one model has no published numbers. MiMo has the independently measured data, Claude Opus 5 has the fast mode option, and they're just not comparable on the same terms. So we end at 1 win each, 2 tests tied. MiMo V2.5 Pro wins on cost. Full stop. At $1 input and $3 output per million tokens versus $5 and $25, it's 5 to 8 times cheaper before you even factor in its 40 to 60% token efficiency advantage. It's open source, self-hostable on Hugging Face, and it has independently measured throughput numbers, 62.5 tokens per second and 2.21 seconds to first token. Claude Opus 5 wins on raw capability and production infrastructure. Arc AGI 3 at 3 times the next best model, and Frontier bench leadership are hard numbers, and users consistently report it pulls ahead on nuanced writing and complex instruction following. On top of that, you get prompt caching, batch API effort controls, zero data retention, and it runs on Anthropic, Bedrock, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Foundry. I was expecting a clearer winner overall, but this one genuinely depends on what you're doing. If you're running high volume API calls, math-heavy coding, or you want open source control, go MiMo V2. 5 Pro, the cost advantage is real and it compounds fast. If you need peak agentic reasoning, complex writing, or enterprise infrastructure and can absorb $25 per million output tokens, Claude Opus 5 is worth it.